Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jonathan Paskey, executive producer and co-founder at Dev Network.
Welcome back to the main stage. We've got another keynote for you. I think we have 5 in a row this morning. Ravs Kaur, she is the CTO at Uplevel. She's going to be talking to you about burnout and productivity. Ravs, welcome to the main stage.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Go ahead and take it away.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. We are here to talk about burnout and productivity. I guess a topic on people's mind a lot these days, certainly on mine. By way of introduction, I'm the CTO at Uplevel, which is really a platform for engineering insights that helps you meet your release goals without burning out people. So no surprise, burnout and productivity, top 2 things on mind. We're going to talk about just what we mean by burnout, how we might identify it, what are some of the causes, especially for developers, and really what can you do about it. And me being a data geek, we might share some stuff about what data can be helpful to have that conversation as well. All right. Any of this feel familiar? We all have been having a pretty, different, rough couple of years. I know for myself, the Zoom meeting meme for sure resonates. The Zoom fatigue is real, and I totally get the irony of delivering this over Zoom. But really, like, a lot's happened over the last couple of years, and we used to talk about burnout even before then, but it has evolved just in the years of the pandemic. Just stepping back, we have an official definition, and I'm not going to read it all quite to you, but it says resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. And if I were a betting person, I would bet that that definition evolves. Because if anything, one thing I have learned and internalized over the last couple of years is that, burnout used to be this thing we used to talk about, which is like 12 plus hours a day, every day of the week. And now it's less. It doesn't have to be the number of hours. We've got so much going on. The lines between work and personal is getting blurred every day. And as humans, just humans, we have a certain capacity that we can adjust to. And as that cups get full, it really gets hard to distinguish whether it was work stress or personal stress. It's the same stress. And, it kind of leads up to burnout. All right. Here, just want to talk about, different stages of burnout. The first one, exhaustion. Ever have that feeling when, you're clicking on launch meeting on Zoom, that big blue button, and you just sigh? It's like, here we go again. And what it is it's this depletion of energy. Your Mondays don't feel quite refreshed. You're not really looking forward to a whole another day of work. And it's happens more and more frequently, right? You're like, oh, I got another question. Oh, I got to do this. So it really feels exhausting. The next stage is what we call cynicism. And, that really feels like apathy. If you've ever had that feeling where you're sitting in a meeting and there's a lot of discussion for something you typically, care about, and you find yourself thinking, I don't care, just pick something and let's move on, right? Your lack of personal investment feels different than it used to feel. And then we have inefficacy. For people, for myself, there was a time when there was this additional role or additional responsibility or additional challenge, and the with all these challenges, you're eager to jump in, you're eager to help, you're eager to like fill in that void that exists. And, somewhere you feel so stretched that you're like, well, that's not my job. I got my job. That's somebody else's job, and somebody else will pick it. I would just love to see in comments, if y'all are on chat, if you've gone through any kind of burnout, which stage do you think you are at? Um, just love to see what, where the audience of this has been. For me personally, I think I caught myself somewhere between 2 and 3. There was a moment when, I really had that, like, all right, like, let's move on kind of feeling. And it triggered for me where I said to myself, I'm like, that's not usually me. Like, I care about it, but I was just finding it so hard to, like, get that energy to really invest. And again, it was a trigger. Well, I think I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I'm like, getting to this point. And the further in the stages you are, the harder it is to recover. And so that is the thing I've learned. The earlier you catch it, the easier it might be to come. I love the comments. Thank you so much for keeping them. And yes, like, people reaching 3 have retired, or maybe quit jobs, because sometimes that is the option that you have. As developers, what makes our life more prone to burnout, maybe potentially, or what are different ways we do that? I think, like, over my years as an engineering manager, the thing that I have learned is developers love to be builders. They love to be creators. They want to build products that can make a difference in customers' lives, right? And today's day and age, developer environments are different. We're frequently interrupted. There's not enough time to get focused work done. We're in meeting hell, right? When was the last time somebody asked you a question uh, on Slack that said, hey, do you have a quick minute? And when was the last time it stayed to be a quick minute? There's fire drills, there's customer issues, there's so many randomizations, there's pages, different types of, different times at night. And with the distributed environment that we have these days, people work in different time zones. So, it's gotten different than it was a decade ago. And a lot of these things add up, because what happens is, when you don't have enough time to focus, you're constantly interrupted, you're in meeting hell, you don't get what you need to get done during the day. And it's sort of become an accepted joke that says, oh, I'll just going to catch up on my real work at night. Not healthy and not sustainable, right? We have to find a way to change the environment of our work, um, so that we can sustain it, so that we can get those dopamine hits of accomplishments during the day that allow us to feel accomplished. And outside of just the environment and how we get work done and team dynamics and things like that, I think sometimes those are symptoms of issues, but the real core issue of why we might burn out is there's just a misalignment, right? Like, I, as a manager, I always say that, if I can kind of find that intersection of what my people want to work on and what the business needs, like, my job's easy, right? And the bigger that intersection is, the better. But there is a sweet spot. And sometimes, if you recognize that there is that misalignment of where I want to go and what the business needs, and you're doing work, what the business needs, you're doing it, and you're doing it over and over. And, we all want to help, and that is great. You should do it. But if you do it for ever, like years, there will get to be a point where you feel burnt out, and you just don't feel like working on that thing, but you feel like you have to. And the fix for this is not tactical, right? It's going to involve conversations, it's going to involve a plan, it's going to involve a slow change. And so it's really important to sort of recognize and be aware that, sometimes I'm just exhausted and I need a break, but sometimes I have a deeper issue that, you know, hopefully can be fixed where I'm at, but sometimes it can't be. And even getting to that piece of acknowledgement is a big step forward. Moving on. And, just talking about all the environment and what I'm working on, we've realized this. I've experienced this. The pandemic burnout makes everything worse, right? I was reading up on, articles and things, and Google's really figured out I really care about this topic, so it keeps feeding me these articles. But there was one that talked about, a feeling that's not they described it as the neglected middle child of mental health. They termed it languishing. They termed it meh, like you feel meh. And that really resonated with me. I kind of felt validated that, it's a thing for real. They called it the, void between depression and flourishing, and really that absence of well being. And when you're in that meh stage, like you ask people, how are things going? And you get like a meh, right? That really is a sign that your motivation's kind of, duller, and it disrupts your ability to focus. So, feeling that way or any of those ways, what can you do? There are a bunch of things that, I've gathered, I've read, I've experimented, I've had friends and family talk about it. The first thing, like detachment, right? Like taking a real break from work or whatever it is that you're dealing with. And, I'll tell you a story about myself. I was like, hey, I need a break. I take a vacation. I'm like, I want to truly detach, right? And so I uninstalled Slack from my phone. And I'm on vacation and I'm like, I'm feeling FOMO and I'm feeling these like triggers and like what's going on and I need to check in. And so I reinstalled it back. And I reinstalled it back and I'm like, well, I'll snooze notifications. I don't want notifications. I don't want it to interrupt me. But that also didn't work really well. And what I found out was, if my vacation's a week long, it takes me some time to actually get to that mode where I can truly detach. And just that awareness for me was interesting enough, where I experimented with different ways to get detached, right? I tried hiking last summer. This winter, I'm taking first ever ski lessons. And turns out that when you feel like you're going to die on a mountain, which is really just a magic carpet or bunny slopes, you don't think about work. And even though it was for just a few hours in the day, at the end of that activity, I did feel detached. I did feel like, I had completely forgotten about work for those few hours. And that was quality detachment for me. So just thinking about and experimenting with different techniques, like, if you can fully detach for a week, great, that's awesome. It was very hard for me. And so for me, I'm trying to find out, smaller bursts of taking time off. Like, we try simple things like no devices when I'm with my kids. I started with half an hour, and I do feel that I might have a problem. Like, my goals are like, hey, can I be away from my phone for an hour? It helps. You might have to experiment with what works, but just taking a true mental break and prioritizing your own mental well-being is super important. Um, Relaxation. People swear by meditation. I tried it. It is a skill to be learned. You think it's easy, but it's not. When I went to my first session of Headspace, I couldn't help but think about everything else. And you hear the voice being like, okay, now your thoughts have wandered, center back. And I'm like, oh, how did he know? But really thinking through again, how do I relax my mind? For me, binge watching Netflix, really some shows that make no sense, helps. Mastery. There's nothing like, exciting like showing off a thing that you're really great at. some of my friends took up cooking and baking, and we benefit because we get like different baked goods, and that's really helped as well. Um, so again, the point is, experimenting and trying different things that really help your mental well-being, and for that you will need to prioritize yourself. What do you do in the office, right? Like, we've talked about things you can do outside. What can you do at work? And the big thing here is that you got to have sort of a trust relationship with your manager. I talked about trying to find things that give you joy at work and give you joy outside work, and working on what kind of energizes you. But the reality, when you get into the reality of it, it's like, no, but this needs to be done, and I don't like it, but it needs to be done, right? And I had that issue when my team of data scientists, for the first year when I was at Uplevel, a lot of what they used to do was kind of analyzing data and really just digging through customer bugs, right? Like, we used to get a lot of feedback on this doesn't quite look right. And they spent a good portion of their year trying to just get that to be accurate. And as much as they wanted to go work on, interesting, innovative models, I couldn't have them do that. And so what was important to me, and if you're a leader in this room, I really encourage you to think about, first step was acknowledgement that this is a problem, that we need to fix it, and it is important, right? And really communicating with your team that, this, I understand where you're at, and I understand that this is not ideal, and we will make a plan together to get out of this. And it's not going to be tomorrow, and it's not going to be next week, but over, I gave myself a quarter of a milestone, like a quarter or two, to actually get out of it. And it takes a lot to get out of it. I think as managers and leaders, we need to work really hard at it, right? It wasn't great for the business. I needed my data scientists to actually build innovative models, but I couldn't have customer requests go unanswered either. So I had to come up with a plan that load balanced, that people picked up those skills that could help and create bandwidth, but over the longer term, hire enough people so that I had the specialists doing the thing that they're really good at. And sometimes it's hard, like as a developer, like, how do you have that conversation with your manager? Like, it's hard to raise up your hand and say, I'm feeling burnt out, and there's this like, oh, what is my manager going to think of me? This perception that, are they going to think I don't, I'm not a hard worker? Because I am. So here's where data can really help support that conversation and make it objective, right? You can talk about, like, hey, manager, you're taking control. You're like, hey, I'm working on these 5 different things. I just want to make sure that the, topmost priority things are the ones that I have the bulk of my focus on, and really have that conversation, which should be a trigger to managers and leaders saying, okay, this person might be overwhelmed, and there's a lot of context switching, which some developers love and some developers don't. And again, understanding what kind of developers you have and what energizes them is super, super, super critical for any manager. And just finding, someone you trust, your friend, if it's not your manager, even therapists, like, you need to be able to really have that trusted person, a sounding board that can help you navigate through some of the things that you're experiencing. We talked about, again, data, and how do we sort of bring that to the conversation, and we talked about like priorities. But there's other things, right? You can talk about your own focus time, this need for load balancing, this context switching. Are we running our sprints well? Like, we get lots of fire drills added. So in a way, as a developer, you're not just having that conversation saying like, hey, I'm burnt out and I need your help, but you're coming in with what can we do, and here are problems I see, and making that very objective and bringing data where you can actually eliminate some of that subjectivity and judgment from it. In just summary, what the really main key takeaways is awareness, like understanding what burnout is, and sometimes it can feel like just exhaustion, but that is the first stage of it. So understanding what it is, and if you're feeling it, identifying the stage that you're in, it all starts with self-awareness. Prioritizing yourself, like you got to make time for yourself and give yourself that grace and time to recover. And trust me, you're not alone. Not alone at all. It's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to kind of come in and even sometimes recognize that, this may not be working, and I need to do something dramatically different. And with that, love to open it to any ideas you've had that have worked well for you. Any questions, thoughts, comments, anything at all.
Yeah, Ravs. So one of the questions that I saw coming through the chat, and please feel free to keep putting them on, is one person said, if I'm not in the sweet spot anymore, what kind of conversations can I have with my manager on that?
It's a great question. And, just like I mentioned, being open with your manager, hey, congratulations, you realize you're not in the sweet spot. Like that it's not easy, right? And then what that does is empower you to have that conversation with your manager and be like, you're not being unreasonable. You're like, hey, I want you to know that I'm totally fine and willing and happy to work on this because it's helpful to the business. But over the longer term, my career ambitions and objectives look a little different. So what I would love to do is come up with a plan that can get me there, right? And as managers, you have to be honest, right? Like I've had times when, I've had that conversation and that has been good ending story where I've been able to put them in that sweet spot there, over time. But sometimes I know that's just not going to happen in my team, right? And I think as managers, the best thing you can do is, help your people. They're people first, right? And so if you realize that, that this may not be an eventuality in your team, help them find a role somewhere else that's going to be that way for them. It'd just be better for you and the business and the developer.
That's great. And then last question, what do you do when somebody's in stage 3 and you see that maybe they're so cynical that it might be toxic to the team?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I think, it's really tough. Like, I think there are different sort of variations. Like I've had one of my friend managers who literally forced their developers to take like almost a mini sabbatical of sorts, right? Like you need to go take time off. Now, what happened was that person came in after the 3 weeks and said, look, I gotta retire, right? I'm done. And while that was really not the outcome the manager was probably hoping for, but it was a great outcome, and the manager was really happy that that outcome, that person came to that self-realization that it's just, I'm done for a bit here and I'm going to take the time to relax and rejuvenate and then maybe come back. And what that does is that builds loyalty with the manager. So the next time the maybe employee is ready to come back, they would reach out to the manager who helps support them through this, right? And sometimes it's like, hey, you're so toxic to the company and team, I'm open. Like it's a really hard conversation to have, but probably better for the longer run to just admit it, acknowledge it, and say like, hey, this may not be a good place for you, and you will be happier somewhere else. It's hard, but tough love. It's like parents, right? Like you think about your kids and you love them, but you want them to be happy, and sometimes you got to really change things up for it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. That was our last question, so we can wrap up.
All right. Thank you both. We'll be back on the main stage in just a few minutes with our next talk.
Thank you.